The winter wind sliced through the streets of Manhattan, its bitter chill forcing people to huddle closer together, hands shoved deep into coat pockets as they braced themselves against the relentless cold. In the midst of this, Donald Trump, wrapped in a dark overcoat, strode forward, flanked by his security detail. His eyes were sharp, scanning the streets with a sense of urgency, as though looking for something he couldn't quite name. Today he wasn't in the comfort of his motorcade. Driven by a sudden, inexplicable urge, he had chosen to walk among the people, immersing himself in the raw, unscripted pulse of the city. As he turned into a narrow alleyway, his pace slowed. His gaze fell upon a man slumped against a cold stone wall, his tattered military jacket hanging loosely over his shoulders, its once proud green now faded and worn like the man himself. A cardboard sign lay at his feet with the words "Veteran in need of help" hastily scrawled across it. Trump paused, his brow furrowed slightly, his gloved hand instinctively clenching. He motioned for his security team to step back, then took deliberate steps toward the man. The sound of his shoes crunching on the salt-strewn pavement echoed through the alley, breaking the eerie silence. The man looked up, his sunken eyes tired but filled with a quiet defiance. His posture straightened as if unwilling to show any weakness. "Who are you?" the man rasped, his voice gravelly like old stones grinding together. Trump didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched down to the man's level and extended his hand with a calm, measured intent. "What's your name?" His voice was steady, offering a bridge between two vastly different worlds. The man hesitated, eyes flicking to Trump's outstretched hand, suspicion flickering in his gaze. But after a long pause, he slowly grasped it. His grip was firm, though his body was unsteady as he pushed himself to stand. "Jack Miller," he said, his voice rough but resolute. "Former Marine." Trump repeated the name as if committing it to memory. "Jack, you've been through a lot." Jack let out a dry laugh, a sound that seemed to fade into the wind. "More than I care to remember, sir. But everyone's got their cross to bear." Trump's eyes shifted to the faint metals pinned to Jack's jacket. "You're a veteran?" he asked, his tone deliberate. Jack nodded, a flicker of pride crossing his weathered face before he tried to suppress it. "Afghanistan, a few tours. We did things I'll never make peace with, but we did them for our country." The wind howled through the alley, carrying with it the distant hum of traffic. Trump stood silent for a moment, processing Jack's words. "Why are you here, Jack?" His voice was low but probing. Jack's gaze dropped, his hands clenching together as he exhaled a slow, heavy breath. "Lost my way when I came back. Jobs were hard to hold down. My health got worse. And the system? It doesn't work the way they tell you it does. Not until you're on the outside." Trump nodded, his gaze penetrating as if he could see right through the walls Jack had built around himself. "What unit were you in?" Trump asked, his voice soft but urgent. "Bravo Company. 3rd Battalion. Kandahar, early days," Jack replied, his shoulders stiffening at the mention. A flash of pride crossed his face before it faded like a ghost. Trump's eyes widened slightly. "Bravo Company. You were the ones who did the impossible. They called you the Ghost Team." Jack straightened, his posture suddenly more rigid. The mention of the team stirred something inside him. "Yeah, we were good. But it all vanished when we came back." The two men stood there, the wind swirling around them, carrying the city's distant sounds. But for a moment, everything else seemed to fall away. Trump studied Jack, his eyes sharp, then spoke again, his voice unwavering. "Come with me. You don't belong here." Jack hesitated, disbelief flickering in his eyes. But when his gaze met Trump's, something about the invitation felt real, genuine. With a slight nod, Jack agreed. Days later, Jack was settled into a hotel nearby, arranged by Trump to ensure his privacy. The warmth from their coffee cups filled the quiet morning air as they sat in a secluded corner. Trump leaned in slightly, his gaze steady. "Jack," he began, his voice low. "I want to do something for you. Not just a room, not just a meal. I want people to know about Bravo Company. About what you and your team did so they can truly understand your sacrifice." Jack lowered his head, his rough hands gripping the coffee cup. "I don't know, sir. Some of those memories, They're better left where they belong. People don't want to hear about what we did." Trump remained silent for a moment, then shook his head. "Not just for them, Jack. For you. You stepped into danger so the rest of us could live in peace. That kind of courage should never be buried." Jack's eyes lifted, meeting Trump's, studying him as if searching for sincerity. After a long pause, Jack gave a subtle nod, his silent agreement speaking volumes. In the days that followed, Trump's team worked quietly but efficiently, organizing an event. Calls were made to Jack's former unit members. Some surprised, others deeply moved, but all agreed to attend. Each came carrying their own stories, their own scars, both visible and invisible. On the day of the ceremony, Jack arrived at the White House. He walked through the grounds slowly, taking in the grand scene unfolding before him, his steps uncertain. The simple suit he wore clung to his lean frame, but his body seemed heavy with hesitation. Trump stood at the entrance, offering nothing but a respectful nod when he saw Jack. Inside, the room was somber, the light from grand chandeliers casting a dignified glow. As Jack entered, the room fell silent. One by one, his former comrades rose to their feet, saluting him with a mixture of admiration and sorrow in their eyes. Trump stepped onto the stage, gripping the podium firmly as he addressed the crowd. "Today we honor an extraordinary individual, Jack Miller, and the entirety of Bravo Company. Their sacrifices deserve recognition, not only for the battles they fought but for the resilience they've shown in facing the wounds that cannot be seen." The room was still, the air thick with emotion. Trump continued, his voice deepening with gravity. "Heroes come in many forms. But those who fight not only on the battlefield but also within themselves. Those are the true heroes." Trump invited Jack to the stage. As Jack walked forward, thunderous applause erupted. Jack's eyes shimmered with emotion, his body trembling, but his gaze remained unwavering. He was no longer just a veteran, he was a symbol of courage. Trump reached into a velvet box, revealing a gleaming medal. He draped it over Jack's neck, speaking in a voice that seemed to echo in the hearts of everyone present. "Jack, for your service, your bravery, and your sacrifice, we honor you. You are a hero, not just to me but to all of us here." As the ceremony ended, the applause continued, a wave of recognition that refused to fade. The room was filled with respect and admiration for a man who had once been lost but had now found a new purpose. Jack's journey had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, Jack's life transformed. He began attending events, sharing his story, speaking for veterans who were still struggling. His words, raw and real, captivated everyone who listened. And as Jack spoke, he didn't just represent himself. He spoke for all the veterans who had returned home only to fight a new battle, one that no one could see but everyone could feel. One day, Jack received an invitation to speak at the National Veterans Honor Gala. The weight of the invitation was heavy, knowing Trump would be there. But Jack, now confident in his purpose, accepted. On the night of the gala, as he stepped onto the stage, the audience watched with anticipation. Jack gripped the podium, his voice breaking the silence with raw honesty. "I stand before you tonight not as a hero," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "but as a man who almost lost himself. I returned from the battlefield thinking I had won. But I realized the real battle wasn't over. It had only just begun." Jack paused, his eyes scanning the room before focusing on Trump, seated in the front row. "The person who helped me find my way. That person was President Trump. And because of him I stand here today, not as a lost soldier, but as a proud veteran with a renewed purpose." The room erupted in applause, a standing ovation that shook the walls. But for Jack, the real victory wasn't in the applause. It was in the lives that were now beginning to change because of the work they had started together. Jack's story became a beacon of hope, reminding all of us that veterans should never be forgotten. That day, Trump stood on stage with Jack, his voice resonating through the room as he announced a new initiative: the creation of a fund to support veterans, ensuring they had the resources to not only survive but thrive. As Jack continued his work, meeting veterans and sharing their stories, the legacy of Bravo Company lived on. Jack's life, once darkened by despair, now shone with purpose, lighting the way for others who had been lost in the shadows. And Trump, though less visible, watched with quiet pride, knowing that one simple act of kindness had sparked something far greater than he could have ever imagined. This was a story not just about one man's redemption. It was about the collective power of community, compassion, and recognition, healing wounds that had long been buried. What do you think? How can small acts of kindness and recognition spark change for those who need it most?